So I wanted a way to talk about this third part of aerobic development, and that really has to do with self-care, but also as a added point, I wanted to hit the pace that I consider zone 2. Well, it is zone 2, but the pace that I think is the best for actual aerobic development. And that's because I'm not talking about aerobic maintenance. I'm talking about expanding the ability to be able to process oxygen at base levels so you can maintain effort. That's really what zone 2 is. So as you watch, notice it's hard for me to keep a non-choppy conversation. It might feel a little bit annoying. Trust me, I'd rather not fucking talk to the camera. I would rather just focus on relaxing, keeping my heart rate down. So as you look in the corner, I will put up my heart rate right now, and that way you can kind of see where it's bumping, going all over the place. Self-care. Self-care is the basics: hydration, feeding, and the essentials that nobody really takes into consideration because they don't really ever do anything long, which is contact points, skin care, rubbing points, all of that stuff. Your dampness of your socks. We have to learn how to address those kinds of issues, getting blisters, whatever it is, because that's what will shut you down. But self-care has probably a bigger overarching theme to it, which is it's an ideal. It's a question in your head that if I need to keep going, what do I need to do? This is more philosophical than it is about sports performance, which is why it's the important part, because a lot of people get out of their event, their endurance effort, and they quit asking that question, and that's why they're not true endurance athletes. So I just want to raise that as the main question that is responsible for prolonged effort. How do I keep going? What do I need to do to take care of my physical stress, my mental stress? How am I going to speak to myself, etc., etc. That is the short of it on self-care. See you guys. Okay, so I wanted to do that opener and a short bit to kind of talk about the main theme of aerobic development that I think is most overlooked. I think it's the most important, and it's probably the most complex because it doesn't stop at where most people think that it stops. What we're talking about with aerobic development, I really want to focus on the development side of it. The development side means that I'm building, I'm growing it, I'm advancing the ability, and then is quite a bit different than just aerobic maintenance. And that is where I think a lot of people get confused. The reason that I opened the way that I did is I wanted to show that zone 2 is incredibly difficult to do anything else. In fact, if you start looking at the numbers, so I showed in the corner that there was, the numbers going on so you could watch my heart rate as I was speaking. Well, after I got done just with that 3-minute piece, it took me about 15 minutes to bring my heart rate back down to normal levels. In fact, I would say I got kind of like at least an aggressive bump for the rest of the session. Now, that, if you're not regulating your breathing or regulating your state while you're doing an effort that's supposed to develop zone 2, I don't think that you're doing it correctly. Zone 2 is not just something that you do passively, it's an active state. It's like very difficult to maintain a precise average. That's different than just having an average of your effort. That's probably the biggest difference. So that being said, I wanted to show first and foremost how difficult it is to communicate or speak. This is not something that you're going to do while you're typing your fucking emails. This is something that you're going to do because as effort prolongs, you're going to need more and more conscious effort to deal with the discomfort. So self-care is an interesting topic. Most people will talk about, this is the nature of endurance, is being able to take care of yourself, hydrate, feeding, fuel, all of that stuff. If you get into the weeds with it, or you're doing like major endurance efforts, you will get into contact points, hot spots. And this becomes obvious. You're like, you see that there's a big theme in running and ultra running where you like have to take care of your feet. This is one of the things that we'll give it away with this actually. If you, click on the link below, we have kind of a guide to self-care. It has all the general themes to it. How much you should hydrate, how much glucose you should take in, yada, yada, protein over long term, all the basic stuff. But we also talk about, threading blisters, drying out the feet, changing socks, putting tape over your nipples. All of this stuff is common themes, but it's just something to think about. Now, the reason why I think the contact points are interesting as a discussion for self-care is because there's the bigger conversation that we classify, and that's the psychological components to endurance. Now, most people just like completely separate this category, just talk about the mental state of it, but really the psychological part of endurance is the self-care part. This is the conversation that is rolling in your head. This is how you are speaking to yourself about how things feel. This is how you're deciding whether you need to calm down, whether you can prolong, whether you need to slow down, whether you need to like back off. Just like the effort that I showed in the beginning, it took me like good 12, 15 minutes to bring my heart rate back down to what I would want to hit for a good endurance piece. That was a slightly different piece than say like a math piece where I'd be developing. I had a set of intervals and step-ups that I wanted to do, and brings us kind of like into the subject, so I'll dive into it. This is this is like self-care for people who self-harm. I don't think you have to make endurance your identity in order to develop the attribute.
I mean, that's climbing in a nutshell. It's like none of it really matters.
And this is something that a lot of people don't know how to do because they think that you have to become an ultra runner or you have to conform your body to a bicycle in order to do one thing repeatedly for a very long time. In order to deal with that, what we do a lot of the time is mix and match modalities like step-ups, body weight movements, running, biking, rowing, skiing, in order to kind of like stay away from just one constant thing. And that's a different skill. You do have to watch how you control your heart rate because the changes and the shifts will drop or raise it. But once you get good at all of these things concurrently, you should be able to do it. That's kind of what I was doing today, and running through a series of trying to finish 5 of these, 12 to 13 minute long intervals, along with about 20 minutes of like auxiliary work. So 5 minutes of step up, stuff like that. I was trying to maintain a constant heart rate, and instead of just waiting till I see the cardiac drift and then changing it, I was looking for the inflection point and then pushing it. So my average heart rate ended up at 143, I think, for the 70, about an hour and 17 minutes of moving. I would argue that I probably could have pulled the plug at around 60 minutes. I started to see an inflection point where, on the bike, my math pace, my average that I like to see is about a 142, 143. My pace for that is either like in meters, you're looking at 156 to 2 minutes per 1,000 meter if you're going on a C2 bike. If you're going on a normal bike, we're talking about wattage, I'm somewhere between 210 and 225 wattage. That would give me a pretty good zone 2. Now, because I'm mixing and matching this with like bigger leg exercises, you're gonna fatigue a little bit faster. But that was probably what I would say is around where my endurance is at. I'm seeing deviations for cardiac drift around the hour mark because I haven't trained it past that. I'm not developing past that. So that really becomes like an important marker for me to just know that, I can move kind of at a good clip for an hour. That's probably good enough for me. Now, if something comes up and I want to develop it past that, I'm gonna have to put in more time, more duration, be a little bit more precise about how I build it. But as a drill, I just wanted to showcase a couple things. There is a way to build endurance concurrently. You don't just have to become the identity of the sport that you like to participate in. You can develop the attributes and still be a normal person. And that might be the biggest revelation to some people. Like, yes, you can run without posting your Strava data. Yes, you can talk about difficult endurance events without talking about a 50K or some overnight slog where you shit yourself, whatever the thing is. So that's one of the interesting points about aerobic development, is that you can do it concurrently. You don't have to stick to one method, running, cycling, anything like that. You can mix and match it. Now, coming back to self-care as the psychology part, why I think this is interesting is that a lot of people skip over it, and self-care as a psychological pillar really makes me consider the voice and the way that we speak to ourselves. So people that have done long efforts usually have like a trick to it. They tend to either mantra themselves like one more thing, just do this, and they just repeat the cycle because it's almost like a distraction method. Some other people like to play little games. Okay, every minute I'm going to do this, then I'm going to focus on that, and then I'm going to move to this position. Because realistically what's happening is, and why I talk about this as a part of self-care, is that the contact points are in your brain. The contact that's being made are by two psychological, or I should say personalities of yourself. The part that wanted to do it and started it, and the part that wants to quit. Those are two distinct characteristics that will bump up against each other more and more frequently. If you don't address it, it will be the thing that unravels you. And why I mentioned like the games that people play is because that's usually a distraction from bumping up against something. So instead of addressing the issue of like, oh man, the shirt has been rubbing my nipples aggressively for a long time, and instead of addressing that by creating a barrier or putting some kind of insulation or adjusting the clothing or the mechanism or stopping to address the hot spot on your foot, you just kind of ignore it by saying like, oh, I just need to like mantra to get through it. Well, once a hot spot or a contact spot or the flesh can't handle the contact anymore, everything else implodes. I find that the psychology or the dichotomy of your psychology is much the same. If you don't address the concern, you're not addressing the self-care. I think that most often, when trained properly, the voice in your head that is telling you to back down technically wants good for you. Now, if you've never done anything before, that's an untrustworthy voice. But once you've created habits of working hard, understanding your physiology, pushing past kind of known limitations, that voice is actually probably a friend. And what it's really saying is pay attention. What it's saying is start looking at all of the cofactors that are going into the effort that we're talking about. So earlier I used a C2 bike. One of the reasons why I like a C2 bike for most Zone 2 as opposed to an assault bike is because an assault bike, in order to get the heart rate up into a realm that would get me into Zone 2, the cadence wouldn't be high enough to be efficient, which means the muscular contraction is too hard, which means there's more tension and pressure on the joint than I want in something that I'm trying to prolong for a long period of time. A C2 bike, on the other hand, I can change the dampener setting in order to get an efficient 85 to 100 RPMs, which is where we see the most kind of aerobic development is in a contraction rate that can sustain that kind of repetition. The reason why that's important is because that is in itself a contact point. The joints are going to be their own contact point. And if you don't understand the mechanisms that make them ache or increase the muscle contraction rate to something that you can't sustain, that will influence the psychology that you're going to start dealing with, which is, oh, my knees ache, oh, my elbows ache, or my back hurts. All of those things that will come and influence the conversation you're having in your head, they start really low down on the chain. So self-care becomes not only the overarching theme of how to balance the discipline that's required to continuing effort, it also becomes the foundation that you thread very early on, earlier than you ever want to know. That is a big secret to developing aerobic ability. is threading the self-care in sooner and sooner so that that delayed psychology becomes more like a realistic conversation. If you've taken care of all of the things that take care of your physical body, and you develop a way to speak to yourself and ask yourself very good questions about your effort, then that voice will be more and more accurate. And at that point, you can endure what you have trained yourself to endure. So if I've trained myself to take care of myself up to an hour, I might be able to stretch beyond that, but it's gonna go into an unknown area. And this is probably what most of us see. Most people might exercise for an hour and then they go to do some marathon, even ultra, or some crazy like long bike ride for charity. And they find that their system breaks down. They find that like, oh my God, I took in all the salt, I took in all the water, but I cramped up and I seized up and my muscles quit working and my body just gave up on me. That's not true. You just have never trained your body to adapt to this process, and you've never asked the real questions. You set out on an effort for a duration and a time and at an intensity that you had no idea what it was going to feel like. And there's no way you could know how to take care of yourself. So part of the process of endurance is pushing into these realms. Now, that doesn't mean you have to, but understand that's going to be a huge limitation just for your psyche and the development of self-care. Once we start understanding how to take care of ourselves, that really is the inflection point that we can utilize discipline, because it's counterbalanced by a logical voice, one that has our best interest in mind, actually. Now, this is counter to what, Instagram people or, tough guys worldwide are saying about toughening up and just being hard or whatever. But to be realistic, the part that gets you through endurance is not the toughness that you have. It's really the care that you have for yourself or the people you are doing it for. That's why in the first iteration of the endurance manual, I wrote that endurance is really a reflection of your capacity for love. It's your ability to tap into things that you are uniquely attracted to. And that's why most commonly when you talk to the best endurance athletes that I have, at least the ones that can do it for a lifetime, not just the most winningest ones, these people usually tap into love of children, love of family, love of parents, love of themselves, love of the craft, love of the sport. There is an attraction and an expression there that allows them to have this conversation openly, because it is not one that is about self-harm. Going long is not about how much you can punish yourself. Those days of thinking that riding a bike for a long period of time or running yourself in the ground to punish yourself, those are so immature. Those are like the most immature expressions of endurance. And unfortunately, because we're enamored by the loudest, kind of like most prominent figure, and that's what they get kind of as a reward for beating their chest and talking about how tough they are, those are the people that we have examples of that teach us about endurance. And those are not good teachers. Those people rarely last. Look around at all the people that talk about being tough, about using endurance by like beating themselves into a pulp. My general insight is that these people don't do it past their prime, in which case I'm not interested in what they have to say. I'm interested in endurance as the ability to prolong effort for as long as I'm alive, which means if you're just pounding your fists into cement in order to prove that you can do it, you probably aren't walking correctly very long. You're not going to be using your hands for very long. These things don't align with kind of the best outcome of endurance, which is longevity. And so that's my take on self-care. I will include a guide for this so that you get something out of it. You can look at the chart if you're interested in doing long things, you just want to know more about self-care in general. Hydration, food, obviously, salt intake, other like helpful cues that we talk about with like contact points, and then also the psychology. That PDF download is free. Feel free to I think drop a comment or whatever, or it's in the comments if this is YouTube. Anyway, I hope that helps. If you have any questions on endurance, I will go into a couple more factors that are interesting to me about aerobic development. Not sure when I'll put them out, but close enough. So if you have any comments on or any comments or concerns, questions about what I've talked about already, drop it into the comments here, and I will see if it's worth putting together in the next little bit on aerobic development. Thanks, guys.